Number 3. Justin Burgwinkel. In 1990, when Justin Burgwinkel was 18 years old, he joined the United States Army. Burgwinkel's goal was to become a ranger. For 3 years, he was stationed at Fort Ord in Monterey County, California. While stationed there, he started to date Yolanda Antunes, who was a student at Santa Clara University. Things were going well, but then in early 1993, Burgwinkel started to act strange. Antunes said that he was moody, and he would abruptly end dates, and he would make secretive trips back to Fort Ord. Then, in the spring of 1993, Burgwinkel was transferred to Fort Lewis, near Tacoma, Washington. After 2 months there, Burgwinkel was given a 2-week leave. He drove to Santa Clara, and he spent 2 weeks with Antunes. She said that during this time, his behavior became even more erratic. He carried around a briefcase, and he was secretive about what was inside of it. One day, Antunes secretly watched Burgwinkel when he opened the briefcase. She said that there were papers inside of it, and Burgwinkel was shredding them. Then, shortly afterwards, Antunes came home and found Burgwinkel sobbing. When Antunes asked him what was wrong, he refused to talk about it. Not long after that episode, Antunes received a strange phone call. It was a man, and he told Antunes to tell Burgwinkel that the mission was off. Antunes asked the caller what he meant, and he just reiterated that she was to tell Burgwinkel that the mission was off, and then he hung up the phone. When Antunes passed along the message, Burgwinkel became very upset. He started cursing, and he stormed out of the apartment. At the end of his 2-week leave, Burgwinkel drove back to Fort Lewis, but he didn't stay long. He bought 2 handguns and 100 rounds of ammunition, and then he went AWOL. When he went AWOL, Burgwinkel hid out in Antunes' apartment. After a few days, he called Fort Lewis, and he said that he would return to the base. He didn't, though. Instead, he again started making secretive trips to Fort Ord. Antunes pleaded with Burgwinkel to tell her what was going on. The only insight Burgwinkel gave was alluding to the 1992 movie White Sands. In the movie, a small-town sheriff finds a dead body and $500,000 in the desert. The sheriff decides to impersonate the dead man and gets swept up in an international illegal arms deal. Shortly after the conversation, on June 12, 1993, Burgwinkel left Antunes' apartment and disappeared. 3 months later, his car was found in the parking lot of a beachfront motel not far from Fort Ord. The guns he purchased weren't in the car, and they were never found. In the trunk of his car was his briefcase. In the briefcase was his keys and his wallet. In his wallet was his army dog tags. Before he went missing, Burgwinkel told Antunes that if someone ever found his dog tags and he wasn't around, that meant he was probably dead. The police think it is quite possible that Burgwinkel is dead. He may have had a mental breakdown and took his own life. Another possibility is that he was murdered. He could have been involved in some type of illegal weapon sale, and he was killed when something went wrong, or he was double-crossed, or he was killed by a greedy partner. Another possibility is that Burgwinkel chose to disappear. He may have chosen to leave because something went wrong with the supposed arms deal, or he may have needed to disappear for another reason. Until Justin Burgwinkel is found, dead or alive, his friends and family may never know what happened to him. Number 2. Georgia Cruise. On the evening of April 8, 1980, 12-year-old Georgia Cruz's parents left her at home with her older brother. Around 5:30 p.m., Georgia walked barefoot out of her family's home in the small town of Montford, Florida, which had a population of 397 people. Where she was going is unknown. It's believed that she was either going to a market or her best friend's house, both of which were nearby. Wherever she was going, she didn't make it. Her family and many townspeople searched for her, but she was nowhere to be found. 2 days after she went missing, the sheriff's office got a call regarding Georgia. The caller said, "Hello? Yeah? You know that girl that you are looking for? Yeah. The 12-year-old? Yeah. She's dead." Similar calls were placed to Georgia's grandmother and the wife of the town's police marshal. 5 days later, the caller was proved right. Georgia was found dead in a sparsely wooded spot in a park about 25 miles away from where she went missing. The cause of death was a single stab wound to the back. One possible odd clue was found on Georgia's body. Georgia usually wore a necklace that consisted of a delicate chain and a gold pendant. She was found wearing a necklace that had a cross made from 2 pieces of silver-colored metal that were welded together. There were also small holes drilled into the metal. The cross was attached to a thick silver chain. The necklace looked homemade. Her family doesn't remember her wearing it before the murder, and they have no idea where she got it from. The case has since gone cold and has created a sense of uneasiness for the small town. One reason it unsettled the town so much is because there is speculation that the killer was local. On the night that Georgia went missing, no one remembers seeing any strange or unfamiliar cars in the area. Georgia may have also been more likely to get into the vehicle of someone she knew. The police think that the caller could have been the killer, and they think that the caller was local. He knew who the police marshal was, and he was able to call his house, where his wife answered the phone. He also called Georgia's grandmother, as opposed to calling her parents. This indicates he knew intimate details about the town and/or Georgia. Unfortunately, none of the calls were ever traced. The call to the sheriff's office was recorded, but sadly, the recording has been lost over the years. Without the recording, the police are hoping that someone will recognize the cross and contact them. The police are hopeful that Georgia Crew's murder will be solved. However, at the time of this video, the case is cold. Number 1. The Long Island Serial Killer. In April 1996, a couple was walking their dog on the beach in Davis Park on Fire Island, New York, when they made a horrifying discovery. It was a pair of women's legs wrapped in plastic. The legs were collected by the police, and they tried to find out who they belonged to, but they weren't able to. Nearly a year later, the torso of an African American woman was found inside a Rubbermaid container near Hempstead Lake State Park in Lakeview, New York. She wasn't identified, but she got the nickname Peaches because of a tattoo of peaches on her left breast. 3.5 years later, in December 2000, another woman's torso was found. This one was found on a beach in Manorville, New York. Jump ahead another 3 years to 2003. On July 26, a second torso was found in Manorville. This time, the police were able to identify the remains. The torso belonged to 20-year-old Jessica Taylor. Taylor was last seen a few days earlier at the Port Authority bus terminal in Manhattan. Then, between July 2007 and September 2010, 5 women who worked as sex workers disappeared from New York City and Long Island. At the time, no one pieced together that the body parts and the missing women were connected. In December 2010, police with a canine unit were searching for 24-year-old Shannon Gilbert. Gilbert was one of the 5 women. She was reported missing in May 2010, and she was last seen in Oak Beach in Long Island. The police were searching Gilgo Beach, which is 7 miles from Oak Beach along Ocean Parkway, and they came across the body of a woman in a burlap sack. The body was identified as 24-year-old Melissa Bartholomew, who went missing July 10, 2009. The discovery sadly confirmed what Melissa's family already knew in their hearts. Melissa had been murdered. They thought she was dead because of a series of phone calls that happened after she disappeared. Melissa's sister, Amanda Bartholomew, received 5 phone calls, one every week for 5 weeks. The calls were made using Melissa's cell phone. The caller would insult and mock Amanda over her sister's disappearance. In the last phone call, the man told Amanda that Melissa was dead, and then he hung up the phone. The police tried to trace the calls, but they had a problem pinpointing the exact location for 2 reasons. The first is that the caller kept the calls under 3 minutes. The second problem is that when they were able to trace them, the calls were made from very busy areas of New York City, like outside Madison Square Gardens and Times Square. The police think he did this because if they were able to trace his location, he would blend in among the people. After the 5th call, the calls stopped. 2 days after Melissa's body was found, 3 more bodies were found not far from hers. Like Melissa, they were wrapped in burlap sacks and they had been strangled to death. They were later identified as Megan Waterman, Maureen Brainard-Barnes, and Amber Lynn Costello. Them, along with Melissa, were 4 of the 5 women who went missing between July 2007 and September 2010. The 5th woman, who had not been found, was Shannon Gilbert, who the police were searching for when they found Melissa's remains. About a month after the discovery of the 4 bodies, the district attorney announced that they were looking for a serial killer. Unfortunately, no solid leads turned up, but more body parts were found. About 3/4 of a mile away from the 4 bodies, along Ocean Parkway, a skull, hands, and a forearm were found. They were determined to be from Jessica Taylor, who was the 2nd torso found in Manorville. 5 days later, 3 more sets of remains were found along Ocean Parkway. The first set of remains were body parts that belonged to the first torso that was found in Manorville. Sadly, the remains have never been identified. The other 2 sets of remains have not been identified either. One was an Asian man who was dressed in drag. He died from blunt force trauma. The second was a female toddler. Most likely she was between the ages of 16 and 24 months. 8 days later, even more remains were found near Jones Beach State Park, which is also on Ocean Parkway. The first set of remains were bones that belonged to the Jane Doe known as Peaches, who was found in 1997. DNA testing was done, and it was determined that Peaches was the mother of the toddler that was found 8 days earlier. Neither mother nor daughter have ever been identified. The second set of remains included a skull. DNA testing concluded that the skull and the set of legs that were found on Fire Island in 1996 came from the same woman. Unfortunately, she has never been identified. Nearly 8 months later, the remains of Shannon Gilbert were found about a half a mile away from where she was last seen. The medical examiner could not determine if she was murdered, or if she died in an accident, or if she died from natural causes, so the district attorney doesn't think that she was a victim of the Long Island serial killer. Even before Gilbert was found, the police and the district attorney were unsure if one killer was responsible for the other 10 murders, or if that area was just a popular dumping ground for killers. Other people think that he is responsible for all 11 murders, and quite possibly more. Shortly after Gilbert was found, the police announced that they were looking into the unsolved murders of sex workers in New York City and Long Island. They concluded that the Long Island serial killer may be responsible for another 5 murders. Unfortunately, no one has ever been charged in any of the 16 deaths. However, in September 2017, the district attorney's office announced that they had a suspect in at least one of the deaths, and that is a carpenter and father of 2 named John Bitroff. Bitroff lived in Manorville, which is where the 2 torsos were found in 2000 and 2003. In the summer of 2014, Bitroff was arrested for murdering 2 sex workers in 1993 and 1994. He got away with the murders for 2 decades, and then the police had a stroke of luck. In 2014, Bitroff's brother Timothy was forced to give the police his DNA for a misdemeanor conviction for violating an order of protection. They entered his DNA into their system, and they were surprised that they got a partial match to DNA that was left on the 2 murdered sex workers. So they knew the killer was a relative of Timothy's. They got a sample of Bitroff's DNA, and it was a match. Bitroff was found guilty, and in September 2017, he was given the maximum sentence for the 2 murders, 50 years to life. The police and the district attorney are going to see if Bitroff is connected to at least some of the Long Island serial murders. However, at the time of this video, the true identity of the Long Island serial killer is unknown. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please subscribe. We post a new video every Thursday and Sunday. You can also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. The links are in the description below the video. But that's all for now. Thanks again for watching.